can actually tell that it's autumn because I went out to walk the dogs last night, and I realized that I hadn't mowed the lawn for a little over a week, and the grass isn't up to my knees yet. And you know, this time of year, a lot of plants are sort of alerted by the shortening days that another growing cycle has come to an end. And so they stop putting energy into their leaves and branches and instead put energy into their roots. And as their leaves turn brown, they reabsorb the chlorophyll so that it's available to fuel the next growing season. And it's all part of the cycle. Sometimes people say you don't get do-overs in life, and that's true. You can't experience the same moment twice. But any gardener knows that we get second chances. One cycle comes to an end, and that begins the next. So this year's garden and next year's garden are not the same garden, but the end of one allows the beginning of the next. So if this year's seeds didn't give you the results you wanted, next year you can try different varieties. And I think humans get second chances fairly often if we recognize them as such. There are second chances that we give ourselves, second chances that we give others. Sometimes others give us second chances. And sometimes life itself gives us a second chance. And so I think if we want this kind of rebirth to be successful, it helps if we bring some awareness and some skills to the process. So some of you know some of this story, but I don't think I've ever told the whole story here. In early 2000, I was living a kind of a hectic life. It was interesting. It was sometimes fun. I had a lot of irons in the fire. I was working as a freelance journalist, and much of my journalism work was in Volusia County, but I lived in Seminole County. And I was pretty engaged in the arts at the time in Central Florida, both in administration and in creation and performance. And so I spent a lot of time on I-4 going back and forth across the St. John's or down into Orlando. And I was connected as an administrator and producer to a community arts organization, and it didn't pay. And I was on the hook for it financially and otherwise. And it was becoming really stressful. So I've been trying for a few years unsuccessfully to extricate myself from all of that stuff. And on top of that, I'd made some questionable relationship choices and some other questionable personal management decisions. And so one day in January, I had worked on a project in one part of town, and then I had to get home to Sanford to do something in my office, and I had to get back downtown in Orlando for a meeting. And so at one point this meant driving on a 6-lane highway through Longwood at rush hour. And I was in the right lane. The other two northbound lanes were stopped, but mine was clear, so I was going about 35 miles an hour in my little sporty compact car. And suddenly I realized an SUV had just crossed the two stopped lanes and was right in front of me. I was going to hit it. And the next thing I knew, I was sitting in my car and someone was moaning, bellowing, really, in pain. And I thought, that person is really hurt. I better try to get out of my car and do something to help him. And then I realized that was me doing the bellowing. And then I felt the pain. My leg hurt. I had a really bad cramp in my side and I couldn't breathe properly. I wanted to get out and stretch, but my door wouldn't open. And things went blank for a little while. And somebody was talking to me through a window and cutting my car door off. And they said I was bleeding from a head wound and my back was hurting, so they immobilized my back and head. And then things went blank for a little while. So then I was in an ambulance and somebody was asking me to please try to stay conscious. And I tried. And then I was on an operating table and a doctor was talking to me. And I was joking with him, I thought, when I said, well, Doc, what do you think? Am I going to make it? And he said, well, we're trying to save you. And then he told me that they knew so far that I had a badly fractured tibia, collapsed lung, some kind of head injury, and he said, we need you to stay conscious. If we keep losing you, we might not be able to get you back. And we need you to tell us what else is going on that we don't know about yet. Well, a chaplain came up and he wanted to know my next of kin, and if there was anybody else I wanted notified, and I told him to call my mom. And apparently at that point they told her that they weren't real confident that I was going to survive. Well, my memory of the next 24 hours is pretty sketchy. But things did finally stabilize, and I was sitting propped up halfway in bed, looking at my leg, which is all wrapped up after surgery. And I remember thinking, I definitely need to make some changes in my life. So a friend called me the next day, and she said she was going to come up and visit, and she was going to stop by the bookstore first, and she asked if there was anything that I wanted to read. And I said, yes, you can bring me anything Buddhist. So the crash wasn't my fault, technically, but I had realized that my life was not leading to a very good end. I had come very close to dying, and miraculously, I found I had a second chance. And so I had a chance to plant some seeds that I hoped would ripen into a better life than the one I've been living. So when I first started writing for the News Journal, my first major assignment with them was to create the content for a big guide to the DeLand Fall Festival of the Arts. And so I made this trip to DeLand to visit Arthur Rayford, who's the artist whose work appeared on the festival poster that year. Arthur was a 70-year-old African-American former building inspector. And after he had retired, he decided that he was going to pursue his real passion in life and get seriously into painting. And his works were just incredible. I loved him. I got to sit in his studio and watch him paint and see all the things hanging on his walls that were finished or partially finished. And they were inspired by untrained Caribbean artists and sort of folk artists, the highwaymen type painters and that sort of thing. But also had a real sophistication to them. He was clearly influenced by Impressionists and Pointillism. And so as I was sitting with Arthur in his studio, he was talking about his life and how he ended up being this highly esteemed and very well paid, by the way, artist. And he said, well, sometimes life just stops you. And then you get to go in a different direction. Well, life had stopped me. In fact, it had almost stopped altogether. And my number one priority at that moment was to get back to practicing Buddhism. So besides near-fatal accidents and major medical events, there are a number of ways that life can, as Rayford put it, stop you. I know people who got second chances as a result of a long-term relationship coming to an end. Drug-dependent or alcohol-dependent people sometimes say that it came from hitting the bottom. And countless other kinds of trauma and crisis can act as these sort of stop signs that tell you you need to go in a different direction. Sometimes we might just have an epiphany, a realization that we're not living the life that we want to live. And so I think it helps if we bring a few skills to this situation. And one of the first ones is acceptance. As hard as the circumstances might be, they're easier if you accept the situation you're in. And that might require making an assessment of exactly what has happened, and it might take some time. Medical events can leave you changed physically. It might take a while to know exactly how changed you are and what your options are. I didn't know, for instance, how severe the long-term effects of my shattered knee were going to be until after quite a bit of therapy. I knew a woman who completely changed her life for the better, really turned it around after her husband died unexpectedly. But first she had to assess what her financial position was and take stock of her situation. To accept our circumstances doesn't mean that we have to give in to anything. We simply need to be realistic and to determine what our options are. We might long for things to get back to the way they were, but that may never be possible. But that doesn't mean that we can't grow in new ways and do new things. I have a colleague in the Tai Chi world named Dennis. Dennis woke up one night about 5 years ago with severe pain down the left side of his body. He lives only a few blocks from a hospital, so his wife rushed him over there. They both assumed that he was having a major heart attack. Well, the good news was he wasn't having a heart attack. The bad news, though, is that he had transverse myelitis, which is an inflammation of the sheath that protects the spinal cord. And by morning, he was completely paralyzed. Fortunately, he started getting some movement back on his right side. And after several weeks of therapy, working really, really hard, he was able to walk again and eventually recovered much of the functioning on his left side. There's a Buddhist term, virya, which is considered one of the spiritual powers. So it's a skill and it's a virtue. It's energetic diligence, the kind of diligence that comes from having faith and determination. So to make the most of a second chance, you need to have that. You need to have the kind of faith that enables you to keep going, to push yourself to recover as much as you can. Dennis still lacks function in some of the fingers in his left hand, and he's weaker overall on that side. He doesn't have the flexibility and strength he used to have. I didn't mention before his illness, he also did Kung Fu, and he had been a personal trainer at the Y. And that's pretty much a thing of the past. But he started really exploring different Tai Chi styles, and he found a teacher who really stressed the internal elements of Tai Chi. And so in a lot of ways now, he's much better than he was before his illness. So you also need patience. You can't expect everything to change overnight. Second chances can require quite a bit of patience. It took Dennis months to get most of his motor functions back. It took me almost 2 years after my accident to revamp my life so that I had fewer stressors and more opportunities to focus on what I thought was really important. You can't force the future to be a certain way or to fit a certain timeline. It's better to stay in the moment and appreciate even small improvements. Sometimes making the most of a second chance will also require some forgiveness. You might need to forgive yourself or someone else. An alcohol-dependent person who wants to turn their life around will really need to be able to accept themselves as they are, complete with their flaws. So people find that a little kind of counterintuitive sometimes. I had somebody say, well, if I'm not beating up on myself for being so bad, why would I bother to change? But it's really more productive to accept yourself as you are. And then learn from your mistakes, but don't characterize yourself on the basis of those things. No one is totally good or bad. We do good things, we do bad things, and we experience the result of both. We can't control the past. The past is gone, can't be changed. So if we've made mistakes, we can learn from them and try not to repeat them. And being realistic, we also acknowledge our innate ability to do good things and to start diluting the results of any negative karma with meritorious karma. You might also be in a position to give someone else a second chance sometime. And those things can take different forms. Depending on the circumstances, you might be able to let go of an insult or injury. But it depends on the situation. You can't control other people. And you can't change their past, and neither can they. But you can accept them as they are, and then be realistic about what the options are. We might not ever be able to get back to the way things were before. But we can always look and say, well, where can we go from here? A lot of times, second chances call us to have courage. We tend to think that people are naturally brave or courageous, but really, courage can be developed just like any other skill or virtue. If we stay within our comfort zone shrinks. If we want our comfort zone to grow, we have to step outside it. So if you're living a second chance, why not use this as an opportunity for growth? Step outside your comfort zone and it will get bigger. That doesn't mean be reckless. It means consider your values and start living by the important ones. It means make decisions based on purpose, not on aversion. In other words, don't let fear or discomfort make your choices for you. Do what gives you the most meaning in your life. So if you look at history, at the way societies and individuals evolve, you find that what appears to be tragedy over the long run can often be a blessing. Great change almost never arises out of peace. It almost always is a response to adversity. The nice thing about second chances, we don't have to start over from scratch. We carry with us what we gained from our former lives. But now we have an opportunity to open up more to our true purpose, to reveal any wisdom and love that we've been keeping concealed from ourselves. So I want to close with a poem by a Chinese poet who lived during the Song dynasty. He wrote, "I have a single bright pearl, long imprisoned in dust. Now that this dust is gone, brightness shines through, illuminating all mountains and rivers." In practicing together and supporting one another on our spiritual paths, in hearing the Dharma, great merit is realized. We dedicate these blessings to all spiritual teachers, to the omnipresent and eternal truth, to the peace of the world, the peace of this congregation, the strength and sound practice of its members, to the restoration and health of the natural world, its waters, plants, and creatures, and to all efforts in its service with gratitude. May this good karma be extended to all relations, and may we realize the enlightened way together.